Welcome back everyone. Today we are going to start chapter 1, tracing changes through 1,000 years. So here in the map 1, a section of the world map drawn by a geographer Al-Adrisi in the 12th century showing the Indian subcontinent from land. So you can see here the Indian subcontinent from land is here in the map. Take a look at map 1 and 2. Map 1 was made in 1154 CE by the Arab geographer Al-Idrisi. The section reproduced here is a detail of the Indian subcontinent from his larger map of the world. Map 2 was made in the 1720s by a French cartographer. The two maps are quite different even though they are the same area. In Al-Idrisi's map, South India is where we would expect to find North India, and Sri Lanka is the island at the top. Place names are marked in Arabic. So you can see here it is marked in Arabic. So you can see here it is Sri Lanka. Cartographer, a person who makes maps. So you can see here is the map of India. Map to the subcontinent from the early 18th century Atlas Nouveau of Guillaume de Isel. And there are some well-known names like Kanauj in Uttar Pradesh spelled in the map as Kanauj. Map 2 was made nearly 600 years after map 1. So map 2 was made after 600 years forward to the map 1, during which time information about the subcontinent had changed considerably. This map seems more familiar to us, and the coastal areas in particular are surprisingly detailed. So you can see here the coastal areas surprisingly detailed here. This map was used by European sailors and merchants on the voyage. See chapter 6. So you can see here the Indian map. It's a very detailed map in the coastal areas. Look at the area in the interior of the subcontinent on map 2. Are they as detailed as those on the coast? Follow the course of the river Ganges and see how it is shown. Why do you think there is a difference in the level of detail and accuracy between the coastal and the inland areas in this map? Equally important is the fact that the science of cartography differed in the two periods. So the science of cartography differed in the two periods, before 600 years ago and later in 600 years ago. When the historians read documents, maps and texts from the past, they have to be sensitive to the different historical backgrounds, the contexts in which information about the past was produced, new and old terminologies. If the context of which information is produced changes with time, what about the language and meanings? Historical records exist in a variety of languages which have changed considerably over years. Medieval Persian, for example, is different from modern Persian. The difference is not just with regard to grammar and vocabulary. The meaning of words also change over time. So meaning of words also change over time. Take the term Hindustan, for example. Today we understand it as India. The modern nation state, when the term was used in the 13th century by Minhaj-e-Siraj, a chronicler who wrote in Persian. He meant the areas of Punjab, Haryana and the lands between the Ganga and Yamuna. He used the term in a political sense for lands that were a part of the dominations of the Delhi Sultan. The areas included thus in the term shifted with the extent of the Sultanate, but the term never included South India. But by contrast, in the earlier 16th century, Babar used Hindustan to describe the geography, the fauna and the culture of the inhabitants of the subcontinent. As we will see later in the chapter, this was somewhat similar to the way the 14th century poet Amir Khusrau used the word Hind, while the idea of the geographical and cultural entity like India did exist. The term Hindustan did not carry the political and national meaning which we associate with it today. So the Hindustan did not carry the political and national meaning that we consider it today. Historians today have to be careful about the terms they use because they meant different things in the past. Take for example simple term like foreigner. It is used today to mean someone who is not an Indian. So foreigner is used to a person who is not an Indian in today's time. But in medieval period, a foreigner was any stranger who appeared, say, in a given village. So who was a stranger in a village was also known as foreigner in medieval period. Someone who was not a part of that society or culture. In Hindi, the term Pardesi might be used to describe such a person, and by Persian, Ajnabi. A city dweller therefore might have regarded a forest dweller as a foreigner. So a city dweller must say foreigner, yeah, for forest dweller, a foreigner. But two peasants living in the same village were not foreigners to each other, even though they may have had different religious or caste backgrounds. Historians and their sources. Historians use different types of sources to learn about the past depending upon the period of their study and the nature of their investigation. Later year, for example, you read about rulers of the Gupta dynasty and the Harshvardhana. In this book, we will read about the following 1000 years from roughly 700 to 1750. You will notice some continuity in the sources used by historians for the study of this period. They still rely on coins, inscriptions, architecture and textual record for information. So they relied on coins, inscriptions, architecture and textual records for information. But there is also a considerable discontinuity. The number and variety of textual record increased dramatically during this period. They slowly displays other types of available information. Through this period, paper gradually becomes cheaper and more available. The value of paper. Compare the following. In the middle of the 13th century, a scholar wanted to copy a book, but he did not have enough paper, so he watched the writing of a manuscript he did not want, write the paper and used it. So you can imagine how difficult it was to copy a book because there was less paper available. Second, a century later, if you bought some food in the market, you could be lucky and have the shopkeeper wrap it for you in some paper. So you'll be lucky if they would have wrapped it in a paper. When was paper more expensive and easily available? In the 13th or the 14th century. People used it to write holy texts, chronicles of rulers, letters and teachings of saints, petitions and judicial records, and for registers of accounts and taxes. Manuscripts were collected by wealthy people, rulers, monasteries and temples. They were placed in the libraries and archives. These manuscripts and documents provide a lot of detailed information to historians, but they are also difficult to use. Archive, a place where documents and manuscripts are stored. So an archive is a place where documents and manuscripts are stored. Today, all national and state governments have archives where they keep all their old official records and transactions. There was no printing press in those days, so scribes copied manuscripts by hand. If you have ever copied a friend's homework, you would have that this is not a simple exercise. Sometimes you cannot read your friend's handwriting and are forced to guess what is written. So this is a fact. Sometimes you don't understand a friend's handwriting. So it was a very difficult task. As a result, there are small but significant differences in your copy of your friend's work. Manuscript copying is somewhat similar. As scribes copied manuscript, they also introduced small changes, a word here and a sentence there. So you can see Figure 1 shows that the painting of scribe making a copy of manuscript. This painting is only 10.5 cm by 7.1 cm in size. Because of its size, it is called a miniature. Miniature painting were sometimes used to illustrate the text of manuscript. They were so beautiful that later collectors often took the manuscript apart and sold just the miniatures. So you can see here, the person is copying the text. These small differences grew over centuries of copying until manuscripts of the same text becomes substantially different from one another. So the copying after copying made the text totally different, and it became something else. This is a serious problem because we rarely find the original manuscript of the author today. We are totally dependent upon the copies made by later scribes. As a result, historians have to read different manuscript versions of the same text to guess what the author had originally written. So it is very difficult for the historians to guess what the original author wanted to say because the scribes had changed the text by copying. Figure 2. Different kind of handwriting could make the reading of Persian and Arabic difficult. The Nastaliq style on the left is cursive and easy to read. The Sikhaste on the right is denser and more difficult. On occasion, authors revised their chronicles at different times. The 14th century chronicler Ziauddin Barani wrote his chronicle first in 1356 and another version 2 years later. The two differ from each other, but the historians did not know about the existence of the first version until the 1960s. It remained lost in a large library collection. New social and political groups. The study of the 1,000 years between 700 to 1750 is a huge challenge to historians, largely because of the scale and variety of developments that occurred over this period. A different movement in this period, new technologies were made their appearance, like the Persian wheel in irrigation, the spinning wheel in weaving, and firearms in combat. So these were new technologies. New food and beverages arrived in the subcontinent: potatoes, corn, chilies, tea, and coffee. Remember that all these innovations, new technologies and crops came along with people. So all these things came along with new peoples who brought other ideas with them as well. As a result, this was a period of economic, political, social and cultural changes. You will learn about some of these changes in chapter 5, 6, 7. So you can see the Persian wheel in figure 3. This was also a period of great mobility. Groups of people traveled long distances in search of opportunity. The subcontinent held immense wealth and the possibilities for people to carve a future fortune. One group of people who became important in the period were the Rajputs, a name derived from Rajputra, the son of a ruler. Between the 8th and 14th centuries, the term was applied more generally to a group of warriors who claimed Kshatriya's caste status. So you can see here, this is a Persian wheel. The term included not just rulers and chieftains but also soldiers and commanders who served in the armies of different monarchs all over the subcontinent. A chivalric code of conduct, extreme valor, and a great sense of loyalty were the qualities attributed to Rajputs by their poet and bards. So the Rajputs were extremely valor and had a great sense of loyalty. So these were the qualities that were attributed to them by the poets and bards. Other groups of people such as the Marathas, Sikhs, Jats, Ahoms and Kayasthas, a caste of scribes and secretaries, or also used the opportunities of the age to become politically important. So throughout this period, there was a gradual clearing of forest and the extension of agriculture, a change faster and more complete in some areas than in the others. Changes in their habitat forced many forest dwellers to migrate. So habitat refers to the environment of a region and the social and economic lifestyle of its residents. So habitat changed. Others started tilling the land and become peasants. These new peasants group gradually began to be influenced by regional markets, chieftains, priests, monasteries and temples. They become part of large complex societies and were required to pay taxes and other goods and services to the local lords. As a result, significant economic and social differences emerged among peasants. Some possessed more productive land, others also kept cattle, and some combined artisanal work with agricultural activity during the lean season. As society became more differentiated, people were grouped into jatis or subcastes and ranked on the basis of their backgrounds and their occupations. Ranks were not fixed permanently and varied according to the power, influence, and resources controlled by the member of the jati. The status of the same jati could vary from the area to area. So, because of these changes, habitat change, the jatis came into existence. People wanted to become more influential and all. So, but the same jati could vary from area to area. Jatis framed their own rules and regulations to manage the conduct of their members. These regulations were enforced by an assembly of elders. So, there were rules and regulations to manage the conduct of the member, but the regulations were enforced by the assembly of elders described in some areas of the Jati's Panchayat. But Jatis were also required to follow the rules of their village. So Jati had to follow the rules of the village also. Several villages were governed by a chieftain. Together they were only one small unit of a state, region and empire. Large state like those of the Cholas as in chapter 2, Tughlaqs in chapter 3 or Mughals in chapter 4 encompassed many regions. A Sanskrit Prashasti, see chapter 2 for an example of the Prashasti, praising the Delhi Sultan Ghiyasuddin Balban 1266 to 1287, explained that he was the ruler of a vast empire that stretched from Bengal, Gauda in the east to Ghazni stretched from Ghazana in Afghanistan in the west and included all the South India Dravida people of different regions. Gauda, Andhra, Kerala, Karnataka, Maharashtra and Gujarat apparently fled before his armies. So you can see here province of the Delhi Sultanate during Muhammad Tughlaq's region according to the Egyptian source Masalik al-Absar fi Mamalik al-Amsar of Shihabuddin Umari. So you can see here, it is the Delhi Sultanate. Historians regard these as exaggerated claims of conquest. So the historians claim that this is exaggerated. This was not the whole Delhi Sultanate. It was exaggerated. At the same time, they try to understand why rulers kept claiming to have control over different parts of the continent, language and region. In 1318, the poet Amir Khusrau noted that there was a different language in every region of this land. Sindhi, Lahori, Kashmiri, Dwar Samudri in South Karnataka, Telangani in Andhra Pradesh, Gujari in Gujarat, Mabari in Tamil Nadu, Gauri in Bengal, Awadhi in East Uttar Pradesh and Hindavi in the area around Delhi. Amir Khusrau went on to explain that in contrast to these languages, there was Sanskrit which did not belong to any region. It was an old language and common people did not know it, only the Brahmanas do. Make a list of the languages mentioned by Amir Khusrau. Prepare another list of the name of language spoken today in the regions he mentioned. Underline names that are similar and circle those that are different. Did you notice that the names by which languages are known have changed over time? So languages names are also changed over time. By 700, many regions already possess distinct geographical dimensions as their own language and cultural characteristics. You will learn more about this in chapter 9. They were also associated with specific ruling dynasties. There were considerable conflicts between these states. Occasionally dynasties like Cholas, Khiljis, Tughlaqs and Mughals were able to build an empire that was pan-regional. So the Cholas, Khiljis, Tughlaqs and Mughals built empires that were pan-regional, spanning diverse regions. Not all these empires were equally stable or successful. Compare, for example, table 1 and chapter 3 and 4. What was the duration of rule of the Khiljis and Mughal dynasties? When the Mughal Empire declined in the 18th century, it led to the re-emergence of regional states, chapter 10. But years of imperial pan-regional rule has altered the character of the region. Across most of the subcontinent, the regions were left with the legacies of the big and small states that had ruled over them. This was apparent in the emergence of many distinct and shared traditions. In the realm of governance, the management of the economy, allied culture and the language through the 1,000 years between 700 to 1750, the character of the different regions did not grow in isolation. These regions felt the impact of larger pan-regional force of integration without ever quite losing the distinctiveness. So that does not change. Old and new religion, the 1,000 years of history that we are exploring witnessed major developments in religion tradition. People belief in the divine was sometimes deeply personal, but more usually it was collective. Collective belief is in a supernatural agency. Religion was often closely connected with the social and economic organization of local communities. As the social worlds of these groups altered, so too did the beliefs. Do you remember what Amir Khosrau had to say regarding Sanskrit knowledge and Brahmanas? So you can see here it was during this period that important changes occurred in what we call Hinduism today. This included the worship of the new deities, the construction of temples by the royalty, and the growing importance of Brahmanas, the priests, a dominant group in the society. The knowledge of Sanskrit text earned the Brahmanas a lot of respect in society. Their dominant position was consolidated by the support of their patrons, new rulers searching for prestige. A patron is an influential, wealthy individual who supports another person, an artistic, a craftsperson, or a learned man, or a noble. One of the major development of the period was the emergence of the idea of bhakti, of a loving personal deity that devotees could reach without the aid of priests or elaborate rituals. You will be learning about this and other tradition in chapter 8. There was also the period when new religions appeared in the subcontinent. Merchants and migrants first brought the teaching of the Holy Quran to India in the 17th century. Muslims regard the Quran as their holy book and accept the sovereignty of the one God. Allah, whose love, mercy, and bounty embrace all those who believe in Him, without regard to social background. Many rulers were patrons of Islam, and the ulama, learned theologians, and jurists. Unlike Hinduism, Islam was interpreted in a variety of ways by its followers. There were the Shia Muslims who believed that the Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law Ali was the legitimate leader of the Muslim community, and the Sunni Muslims who accepted the authority of the early leader Khalifas of the community as the succeeding Khalifas. There were other important differences between the various schools of laws, Hanafi and Shafi'i, mainly in India, and in theology and mystic traditions. Thinking about time and historical periods, historians do not see time just as the passing of hours, days, or years. As a clock or a calendar, time also reflects the changes in society and economic organization, in the persistence and transformations of new ideas and beliefs. The study of time is made somewhat easier by dividing the past into large segment periods. That possesses shared characteristics. In the middle of the 19th century, British historians divided the history of India into three periods: Hindu, Muslim, and British. The division was based on the idea that the religion of ruler was the only important historical change, and that there were no other significant developments in the economy, society, or culture. Such a division also ignored in the rich diversity of the subcontinent. So it affected the diversity of the subcontinent. A few historians follow this periodization today. Most look to the economic and social factor to characterize the major element of different movements of the past. The histories you read last year included a wide variety of early societies, hunter-gatherers, early farmers, people living in the towns and villages, and early empires and the kingdoms. The histories you will be studying this year are often described as medieval. You will find out more about the spread of peasant societies, the rise of the regional and imperial state formation, sometimes at the cost of pastoral and forest people, the development of Hinduism and Islam as major religion, and the arrival of European trading companies. These 1,000 years of Indian history witnessed considerable change. After all, the 16th and 17th, 18th century were quite different from the 8th and 11th. Therefore, describing the entire period as one historical unit is not without its problem. Moreover, the medieval period is often contrasted with the modern period. Modernity carries with it a sense of material progress and the intellectual advancement, This seems to suggest that the medieval period was lacking in any change whatsoever. But of course, we know this was not the case. During these 1,000 years, the society of the subcontinent were transformed often, and economies in several regions reached a level of prosperity that attracted the interest of European trading companies. As you read this book, look out for signs of change and the historical processes of at work. Also, whenever you can compare what you read in this book with what you read last year, look out for changes and continuities whether wherever you can, and look at the world around you to see what else has changed and remained the same. So you can imagine here, you are an historian. Choose one of the themes mentioned in this chapter, such as economic, social, or political histories, and discuss why you think it would be interesting to find out the histories that of that theme.